A man who has truly made peace with his own death cannot be controlled. Not by failure, not by rejection, not by the contempt of the crowd, because the worst the world can threaten him with, he has already faced. Tonight, you are going to learn how the most powerful man in the ancient world made that peace on purpose every single day, while running an empire through war and plague. And you are going to learn why, the moment you can do the same, every smaller fear in your life loosens its grip at once. Because here is what you have gotten wrong. You think your problem is that you are not disciplined enough, not ambitious enough, not strong enough. It isn't. Your problem is that you are afraid, and not of the thing you believe you fear. You think you fear failure, or rejection, or the contempt of men whose names you will have forgotten within a year. You don't. Those are shadows, every one of them, thrown across the wall of your life by a single fire you have spent your entire existence refusing to turn and look at directly. There is one fear underneath all the others, the master fear, and every smaller fear is quietly borrowing its power from it. And you have arranged everything, your schedule, your ambitions, your distractions, your noise, so that you never have to stand in front of it. So you flinch at the small things instead. You shrink the goal until it cannot humiliate you. You delay the move until it cannot be judged. You manage your image, you avoid the arena, and you call your cowardice patience. The whole time, the real terror sits untouched in the dark, governing you through proxies you mistake for the problem itself. Tonight, you walk straight up to it, not morbidly, not to despair, because a man who has faced the worst the world can do to him has nothing left to be threatened with. So let us be clear about what this is, because you have heard it cheapened. Memento Mori, remember that you will die, has been dressed up in 1,000 costumes that have nothing to do with what it actually is. It is not the morbid teenager's fascination with the grave. It is not the edgy worship of death. The skull is a fashion accessory, the pose of a man pretending he does not care whether he lives. It is not depression wearing a Latin name. The Stoic who first practiced this was not in love with dying. He was in love with living correctly, and he understood that you cannot do the second without honestly facing the first. Remembering death is not what makes life dark. Remembering death is the only thing that makes life serious. Now, look at what your avoidance has actually cost you. Because you will not think about your ending, you behave as though there is no ending. You assume an endless supply of tomorrows, and a man with infinite tomorrows is in no hurry to be brave today. So you become timid. You postpone the call, the launch, the confession, the leap, telling yourself there is always more time. You play small because small cannot be measured against the largest thing. You mistake the avoidance of risk for safety, when it is only the slow surrender of your one life to comfort. The fear you refuse to name does not disappear when you look away from it. It simply rules you from behind a curtain, dressed up as caution, dressed up as realism, dressed up as later. A man governed by a fear he will not name is not free. He is merely obedient to a master he refuses to see. So name it. Memento Mori. Phrase is Latin, and the practice older than the words. When a Roman general was paraded through the city in triumph, crowned and worshipped, the crowd roaring his name as though he were a god, a servant is said to have stood behind him in the chariot with one duty: to lean in close through all that adoration and murmur a reminder. Remember that you will die. At the very height of a man's glory, when he was most tempted to believe himself immortal, someone was assigned to tell him the truth. That is the whole spirit of it. Not to ruin the triumph, but to keep the man inside it sane. Now understand precisely what separates this from nihilism, because the two are constantly confused. The nihilist looks at death and concludes that nothing matters. If it all ends, why care? Why strive? Why anything? The Stoic looks at the very same death and concludes the exact opposite. This matters now, precisely because it ends. The deadline is what gives the work its weight. Remove death and every moment becomes interchangeable, infinitely repeatable, therefore worthless. Add death and this hour becomes unrepeatable, unrecoverable, and therefore priceless. Death is not the argument against meaning. Death is the thing that makes meaning possible. And here is the mechanism you came for, stated plainly. Death is the largest certainty a man will ever hold. And the largest certainty, once truly accepted, has the power to shrink every smaller fear standing next to it. Place your terror of rejection beside the grave and watch it lose its size. Consider the man who understood this better than almost anyone who has lived. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, born in the year 121, and raised to rule the largest, richest, most powerful state the Western world had ever assembled. Picture the position honestly. He commanded the legions. His face was on the coin in every hand from Britain to Syria. There was no court he could not enter, no luxury he could not summon, no man who could lawfully tell him no. By every measure of worldly power that you quietly chase, he had already arrived at the summit. Now hold that picture, because here is the part men forget. His life was hard in a way that a rival did not soften. He ruled through the Antonine Plague, a pestilence that emptied cities and killed, by some estimates, millions across the empire. He spent years on the northern frontier, in the cold mud of the Danube, fighting brutal wars against tribes pressing at the borders. He was betrayed by Cassius, a trusted general who declared himself emperor against him. He buried children, several of them. In an age when even the most powerful father on earth could not keep his own sons and daughters alive. His health was poor for much of his life. This was not a comfortable philosopher musing in a garden. This was a man under sustained, grinding pressure, with everything the world prizes, and the constant knowledge that all of it could be taken in an hour. And by lamplight, in military camps, in the few quiet moments his duties allowed, he wrote. Not essays for the public, not speeches for the Senate. Private notes to himself, in Greek, reminders no one was ever meant to read, which we now call the Meditations. He was steadying his own mind against fear and death, over and over, in the dark. That is why his words can be trusted. He did not theorize about hardship from a position of comfort. He paid for every line. And the thing he kept telling himself was this. In the second book, he writes, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. Read it slowly, because everything hangs on it." He is not saying you will die someday. In the comfortable, far-off way men file death under eventually. He is saying you could be gone today, this hour. And then he gives the instruction. Let that fact decide your conduct now. This was not a mood that came over him once. It was a discipline he practiced deliberately, on purpose, returning to it again and again across the pages, because a thing practiced once is forgotten by morning. He chose it at dawn the way a soldier chooses his post. Now hold two men side by side. The first treats his death as infinitely distant, a rumor about someone else, and so he is careless with everything. Careless with his hours, careless with his courage, spending his days as though the purse were bottomless. The second keeps his death close, not to torment himself, but as the one fact that puts every other fact in proportion. He spends correctly because he knows the supply is finite. He does the real work first because he might not reach the afternoon. He does not waste a single day buying the approval of people he will not remember, because he can feel the clock under everything. This is the difference between knowing a fact and using a tool. Every man knows, in the abstract, that he will die. Almost no man lets that knowledge touch a single decision. Marcus took the fact every other man buries and turned it into an instrument, a blade he set against each choice to cut away what did not deserve his one finite life. Knowledge changes nothing. The tool, picked up and used daily, changes everything. There is a practice Marcus returns to that the Stoics called the view from above, and you can run it yourself right now in the space behind your eyes. Rise, lift your imagination off your own face and your own grievances, and climb. Above the room, above the building, above the city with its million private dramas, above the country, until the whole arrangement of human striving lies beneath you, small as a map. From that height, look for the thing that has been ruining your week, the rival's opinion of you, the feud you keep rehearsing in the shower, the meeting where you felt small. Look for them from up there. You cannot find them. They have shrunk past the limit of sight, and they were always that size. You were simply standing too close. Marcus did this constantly, deliberately, because altitude restores proportion that proximity destroys. Then add the second axis, the one that finishes the work: time. Every single person whose judgment you fear will also die. The man whose approval you are bleeding yourself dry to win, dust within a century, his opinions gone with him. He writes in the 6th book that Alexander the Great and his mule driver both died, and the same thing happened to both. Absorbed alike back into the world, or dissolved alike into atoms. The conqueror and the servant, one ending. Almost everything you currently agonize over will be forgotten within a single generation. Your humiliations included, your triumphs included. Hear this correctly, because it is the hinge. This is not despair. Despair says nothing matters, so give up. This says the trivial does not matter, so stop bleeding your strength into it, and pour that strength where it actually counts. The view from above does not make you smaller. It cuts loose the 1,000 small things that were making you small. Stay with me, because this next part is work that is lonely by design. To face your death deliberately, daily, while the entire world around you is engineered to help you forget it. To numb it, scroll past it, drown it in noise and novelty, is to go against a powerful current. It is unfashionable. No one will applaud you for it. But men have never done this work entirely alone. Marcus practiced it surrounded by soldiers in the camps. The Stoics trained together, sharpened each other, held the line in common. The discipline is solitary in the doing, and shared in the keeping. That is what this channel is. If these are the things you have been hungry to hear, said plainly. If you want to stand among men who refuse the easy forgetting and choose to look directly at what others flee, then subscribe to the Forged Mind and take your place in that line. The algorithm that delivered this to you does not care whether you become a serious man. The Brotherhood does. Subscribe, and let us keep the watch together. Now, back to the fire, and what happens to your smaller fears the moment you finally face it. Here is the payoff, and it is mechanical, not sentimental. Walk the smaller fears past the grave one at a time, and watch each one fail to survive the encounter. The fear of rejection. You are afraid that a person, a panel, An audience will tell you no, but set that no beside your own ending. The moment when you are gone and every door is closed to you forever, and the rejection reveals itself as nothing, a single closed door in a corridor full of them, survivable, repeatable, almost weightless. The fear of failure. You are afraid the venture collapses, the work is judged and found wanting. But you were going to lose all of it anyway. The money, the title, the standing. Death takes the entire estate regardless. A failure is only the early loss of something you never got to keep. Fear of humiliation, of looking foolish in front of watching men. That fear does not survive the grave for one simple reason. The men watching you will be dust, and so will you, and the memory of your stumble dies with the last person who witnessed it. The approval of others, you have organized your life around it, and it is the lightest thing of all, the opinion of mortals about a mortal, already dissolving as you chase it. And loss itself, the fear of having something torn from your hands. You will lose everything you have. That is not a threat. That is the contract you signed by being born. A man who has accepted that he will lose it all cannot be controlled by the threat of losing some of it. This is where the title stops being a slogan and becomes literal fact. Nothing can control you. Because control runs entirely on fear, and every fear they could use on you is only a smaller version of the one you have already faced and made peace with. Worst has been met. The leverage is gone. Now, turn from defense to attack, because this is the part the ambitious man most needs and least expects. The deepest thing your death does for you is not protective. It is propulsive. It is the cure for procrastination and the cure for cowardice, and you will find no stronger one. Seneca, who was a Stoic before Marcus, wrote a whole work on this, and his diagnosis cuts to the bone. It is not that we have a short time to live, he says, but that we waste much of it. Life is long enough, given to us in generous measure, if all of it were well invested. The problem was never the length of the runway. The problem is that you act as though the runway were infinite, and a man who believes he has unlimited time will always find a reason to begin tomorrow. Why face the hard thing today when there is an endless supply of todays behind it? That belief is the engine of every delay in your life, and the unfaced death feeds it directly. So long as you keep your mortality buried, you keep the fantasy of infinite tomorrows alive, and the fantasy of infinite tomorrows is the exact soil cowardice grows in. But the faced death destroys the fantasy at the root. There is no infinite tomorrow to hide in. There is this day, possibly the last, and the thing you keep postponing. Marcus did not let himself dream of endless years. Death overshadows you, he wrote. While you are alive and able, be good. While you are able. That is the whole of it. The same fact that ends you is the fact that starts you. Memento Mori is not a funeral march played over your ambition. It is the deadline that finally makes your ambition serious. And a man with a real deadline stops negotiating with himself and moves. So here is the drill, concrete enough to run tomorrow morning. Marcus tells himself to do everything in life as if it were the last thing he were doing, and to stop being aimless, stop letting his emotions override what his mind tells him. Make that a daily structure in 3 movements. The morning frame, first. Before the day takes you, set it down deliberately. This day is borrowed, not owed to me. I was not promised it, and I may not finish it. That single thought, held for 10 seconds at dawn, changes the texture of every hour that follows. It removes the entitlement that makes a man lazy. Then the question, carried through the day, set against every decision that matters. Does this still matter under death? The grudge you are nursing, does it survive that question? The hour you are about to pour into other men's opinions of you, the doom scroll, the image you are managing, the safe non-move you are calling strategy, hold each one up to the grave and ask whether it still deserves your one finite life. Most of it will not survive the asking. That is the point. The question is a blade, and it cuts the trivial away from the essential with a precision nothing else can match. Then the evening accounting. Last. Before sleep, look back across the day and ask the hard version. If that had been my final day, would it stand? Not perfectly. No day is perfect. But would it stand as the day of a serious man? Some evenings the answer will shame you. Let it. That shame is information, and it will bend tomorrow straighter. Morning frame, daily question, evening accounting. It costs you minutes, and it returns your life to you. This is not philosophy to admire from a distance. It is a drill, and you can run the first repetition the moment you wake. But guard the door here, because there is a counterfeit version of this man, and he is easy to become. He hears all of this and goes cold. He decides that since everything ends, he will hold nothing, feel nothing, love nothing. He will float above his own life, detached and untouchable, mistaking numbness for wisdom. That is not the Stoic. That is a frightened man who found a respectable disguise for refusing to live. Look at the actual Marcus, and you will not find that man. He grieved. He buried his children, and he felt every loss of them. The meditations are not the notes of a man who had stopped caring. They are the notes of a man who cared enormously and was teaching himself to carry it. Accepting death is not what makes you cold. It is precisely what frees you to love this life fully, because you are no longer clutching it in terror. The man who clings to a thing strangles it. The man who has accepted he will lose it can finally hold it open-handed and enjoy it while it is here. Marcus put it directly. Accept the things to which fate binds you, and love the people fate brings you together with. Do so, he says, with all your heart. With all your heart. That is not the language of a checked-out man. A word of caution, since you will hear it elsewhere. The phrase Amor Fati, the love of one's fate, belongs to Nietzsche, not to Marcus, and you should not put it in the emperor's mouth. But the thing itself, the loving acceptance of what is, runs straight through the Stoics. Death does not make the present pointless. Death is exactly what makes the present precious. The man who has faced his ending is not the frozen one. He is the only one fully, fiercely alive. And now the question of what you do with the energy this frees, because here too there is a wrong turn. A man could take Memento Mori and twist it into pure appetite. If I die anyway, then pleasure, then grab, then serve only myself, burn it all on me before the dark. Marcus would not recognize that man as a student of his, because for Marcus, mortality did not point inward toward indulgence. It pointed outward, toward duty. The fact that he would die was precisely the reason to do his work well, to be useful, to serve the whole while there was still time to serve it. He reminds himself that what is bad for the hive cannot be good for the bee, that a man is part of something larger than himself, and a life spent only on his own comfort is a life that has misunderstood what it is for. So take the courage your death has given you and aim it correctly. Because you will die, build something that holds weight for other people. Provide. Protect. Make something that outlasts your own impulse and your own appetite. A family steadied, a work that serves, a standard raised that other men can stand on after you. This is where ambition finally comes clean. Ambition rooted only in the self is anxious, brittle, forever needing applause to justify itself. But ambition rooted in service and sharpened by the deadline of death becomes something else entirely. Clean, calm, and very nearly unstoppable, because it no longer needs anyone's permission, and it is no longer running from anything. The deadline that frees you from fear is the same deadline that should aim you at something worth the freedom. Now stand back and take the longest view of all, the one that settles the whole matter. Marcus Aurelius ruled the greatest concentration of power the world had yet produced. The legions, the frontier from the Atlantic to the desert, the marble and the gold, the roads, the courts, the worship of millions, all of it answered to him, and every piece of it is gone. Say it plainly. All of it. The empire fell. The legions rotted into legend. The frontier he bled to hold dissolved centuries ago. The plague passed, the palaces crumbled, the coin with his face on it sits in glass cases now, curiosities of a dead world. He himself died in a military camp more than 18 centuries ago, an old man worn down by a life of war and duty. By every single metric, the ambitious man worships power, territory, wealth, the roar of the crowd. Marcus Aurelius vanished completely. And yet, the private mind he forged in the dark, the notes he scratched to himself by lamplight to keep his own soul upright against fear and death, that survived all of it, that still reaches across 1,800 years and steadies men who were not born when he wrote a single word of it. It is steadying you tonight. Read the lesson in that carefully. The body fades. The business passes. The empire becomes dust, and the name is eventually forgotten by all but historians. Everything you are currently tempted to sell your soul for is on its way to the glass case. The one thing death could not fully take from Marcus was the character he forged while he was alive. That is the only legacy that lasted. Memento Mori does not just free you from fear. It points you with a steady finger at the single thing in your life that will outlive your death. It tells you to spend your days building that. So come back now to where you started and look with clear eyes. You thought you feared failure. You thought you feared rejection, humiliation, the verdict of the crowd, the losing of what you have. You see them now for what they always were, shadows, every one of them, thrown across your wall by the single fire you spent your life refusing to face. And you understand the trick of it at last. You cannot fight shadows. You can chase them and manage them and rearrange your whole life around them forever. And they will not lose an inch of their power, because their power was never theirs. It was always borrowed from the fire. Make your peace with the fire, and in the same instant every shadow on the wall goes weightless. This is the truth the title was pointing at the entire time. A man who has truly made peace with his own death cannot be controlled. Not by fear, because the worst it can threaten has already been met. Not by the crowd, because their approval is the opinion of dust about dust. Not by loss, because he signed the contract for total loss the day he was born and has stopped pretending otherwise. He is, in the oldest and hardest sense of the word, free. So stop waiting. The clock under everything was always running, from the first word of this to right now, and it does not pause for your readiness. This is the only life you are given, and it is, this very moment, ending. So begin. Start the thing you have been postponing into a tomorrow that was never guaranteed to you. Live this day as a man who has already faced his own death, and therefore has nothing smaller left to fear.